Thank you for coming. The topic for today is growth, which I'm sure everyone is interested in almost perennially because it's the lifeblood of business. Why don't we start with introductions? We'll talk a little bit about our experience and what we're seeing as framing. And then I find that these discussions are best as Q&A sessions, so people can kick off questions that are interesting to them. Why don't I let you start with introductions and I'll follow up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ken Rudin, and currently I run growth for Google. And what that means is I'm responsible for working with all of the Google products and helping the individual product teams figure out the right strategies for increasing user acquisition, engagement, and retention. That's fundamentally our premise. So we're a centralized team that works with all of the other teams. Before that, I ran the analytics function at Facebook for about 4 years, and we were part of the growth team at Facebook. So most of what my team was working on, we had a couple hundred analysts, and most of what we were focusing on was what is actually driving growth at Facebook. And so I spent 4 years there. And then prior to that, I did a very similar role of analytics and growth, ran that function for Zynga for several years. I've also had two of my own startups, companies that I started. One self-funded and one was funded by VCs. So I've seen from big companies like Facebook and Google, small companies such as my own, companies somewhere in the middle. I also, for a period of time, ran product and the engineering org at Salesforce.com. So I've seen a lot of things that we've tried and didn't work and a couple things that did work. So hopefully I can try and distill some of that.
Well, my name is Adam Nash. I started my career as an engineer. I thought I was joining Next. I ended up joining Apple, not the giant Apple now launching the iPhone X, but the Apple that was doing layoffs like every month and was going to die, but didn't, and ended up learning a lot there. I ended up doing a startup that went public in '99. That was really a B2B startup that focused on software distribution and encryption. It did go public, but as you guys know, everything went public in '99, so it was kind of like the thing to do. But after that, I started really thinking about business, and I had the good fortune to join some very good teams, worked at eBay for about 4 years, a lot of different product roles, ended up building a new business for them, where growth that was probably the first time being at a large company where I realized that growth wasn't a given, that if you have a new property, a new product, a new service, thinking about how users are going to find you, what their engagement's going to be like, how do you retain them, just isn't an automatic brand extension. Like, you actually have to work at that problem. And then when I went to LinkedIn in 2007, LinkedIn was still early enough that it had some basic things working on growth, and I was in charge of core product. But as LinkedIn grew, the situation changed, and so I ended up founding, basically deputizing part of my team to become what became the growth team at LinkedIn, which has been very successful in a whole number of dimensions. In 2012, I spent a little bit of time at Greylock Partners as an EIR, and then most recently I was president and CEO of Wealthfront for 4 years, which is in the fintech space. And so I've touched growth in a lot of different businesses. In general, I find myself, I'm a pretty active angel investor. I find myself giving advice to both consumer startups as well as enterprise B2B startups. It goes without saying that that's a very different growth game, both in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of the different channels that you go for, and also how to even think about the problem and how it fits into your business. But I'm mostly on the consumer side. Sounds like you're mostly on the consumer side, Sue.
Yeah, I actually started,
Salesforce
the
DNA.
first half of my life was Oracle and Salesforce.com in the enterprise space, and then I converted. But still have a passion for both.
Then I'm going to defer enterprise here. No. But I think that every year the questions change, so happy to talk more about any of those experiences or answer questions that you think are relevant today. Anyone brave enough to start?
So I'm going to start, not with a question, but I'll start with some comments which may raise some questions. There are a couple things that I try to synthesize about what are some core principles that seem to work across enterprise, across consumer, big companies, small companies, game companies, utility companies, whatever they may be. And if nothing else, I'd like to at least share a couple of them. The first one is I used to approach growth as a set of tactics where you can change this particular thing, and they were kind of growth hacks. And I'm not a huge fan of the term growth hacking because it sounds like it's something where you really have to learn all these special tricks and tips and techniques to do it well. What really has kind of come out of the different companies I've worked on for growth is that it's really a process. It's an iterative, data-driven process. You don't have to be particularly talented at anything that is or have deep experience in growth to run a growth process well. It starts with gathering data on a few particular areas, identifying what it is that you want to move, figuring out what has moved it in the past, and then inch by inch, figuring out how to move those metrics, which brings me to the second principle, which is usually people are trying to look for a home run. They're trying to find, okay, if I have a growth curve and it's going up slowly, and then is there something that makes it skyrocket and get that hockey stick shape? And generally, that's the wrong thing to be looking for. Even at Facebook, we had a few of those where it would go vertical, but it would only go vertical for a brief amount of time. One was when we years and years ago when we launched the ability to add photos into your news stream. Before you couldn't do that. The only place you could add a photo was in your profile. And we found that people were constantly changing their profile photo, and it had nothing to do with photos of them. It was just photos, and they would, in their posts, refer people back to their profile photo. So it was an obvious next step to put those in the actual feed itself. We saw a skyrocketing growth for a few months, and then it leveled out again. Looking for those things is like looking for lightning to strike. Most companies never find it, and some companies find it once. Very, very few find it twice. But there is a hell of a lot of companies that have consistent growth. If you want consistent growth, you need to think about growth as it's a game of inches. It's not about these home runs. It's about finding something that you can improve, tweaking it, and then trying it again, and tweaking it again and again. So if you look at the aggregate growth for Facebook or for Zynga or for Google, and you add up those parts where the growth curve is vertical, and you compare it to the other growth, the aggregate growth of where it's more steady and consistent, the overall growth is heavily dominated by the steady, consistent parts. So yeah, you'll get lucky and maybe get something that goes vertical, but focus on what are the small things I can do in a highly iterative process. So it's something you do again and again and again. So those are two of the main principles. I wanted to hear from you guys, what are some of your biggest growth challenges right now? What are the things that, for any of you who are trying to grow something right now, what are some of the things you're facing? So the question, you have a 6-month sales cycle, which is pretty typical for enterprise. And I don't know, do you have a comment on that? I can answer.
No,
okay.
I'll let you get into enterprise if you like.
The growth things that I do for enterprise products, a lot of it is treating the sales process as a funnel, just like you have a user acquisition funnel, and figuring out where you have the leaks in the funnel. And there's two things that you want to be looking at. One is you have so many stages in the funnel. Where are you losing the most people? And it's just simply, okay, if I'm losing from stage 4 to stage 5, only 20% of the people are making it from 4 to 5. If you can just get that to 23%, right? That's like a 15% increase if I did that right. Yeah. So just 20 to 23, that's the inches I was talking about. You don't have to get it to 60. Just get it to 21 even, right? That means 5% more out the other end. So figure out, is there something you can do? Just iteratively tweaking. So that's the first thing, is finding the leaks. There's always going to be a worst step in the funnel, and that's the one you want to focus on, just trying and experimenting things. It's a little harder when you're in a sales cycle. You don't have quite as many opportunities to test it. There's one of the nice things about being at a Google or a Facebook or a Zynga is you've got millions of people. But that doesn't mean you can't test it. It just means it's the tests take a little longer and it's a little harder. The second thing you want to look at is the duration of each phase. So just like in a consumer app, we're trying to get people to an engaged stage as fast as possible, and there's several steps and several motions they have to go through before they get there. You have a leaky part of your funnel, you also have a lengthy part of your funnel, and figure out, can I shave a few days off of that? Can I make the contract? This is one thing we did at Salesforce. We used to have a contract that was 36 pages. We got it down to one double-sided page. So, there were a few things we left out, but it was so easy to just understand that contract and sign it, and that would shave 5 days off of the sales cycle. So just iteratively shave it down.
Yeah, I think, and you didn't describe what stage your company is at. The only thing I would add is, LinkedIn, as you know, fundamentally at its heart started as a consumer company. We didn't launch the first enterprise product until January 2008. When you're trying to build out an enterprise sales funnel for the first time, you're really trying to learn a lot of things at once, right? You don't really know that you have the right product market fit. You don't know who the right advocates are. Some of your engagements and leads are kind of ad hoc. You haven't actually figured out, like, you're responding to almost any interest you can, and you're trying to make things happen. So the only caveat I would say is that just be careful, and this is true on the consumer side too, but be careful about optimizing something if you don't have a degree of confidence that this is the final form, right? And so, the first thing that we tried to sell in the enterprise is we were getting this inbound about LinkedIn subscriptions, right? A CFO would say, hey, my recruiting team is expensing a lot of these. Can I get some sort of group discount? And by the way, while you're at it, since I'm paying for it, when they leave the company, I want to keep that seat. I don't want it to go with them. And then there were all these other features that started coming. Well, it'd be nice if they saw what each other was doing, blah, blah, all this other stuff. And so getting the right product, figuring out who that right advocate is. Are you educating the market, or like is it pull or push? A lot of the work sometimes you have to do is even just framing the problem so that the right advocate, that's how you lower friction in that whole process. In the beginning, you don't have any of those things. So usually actually you're learning from those early customers. And so you can't run perfect experiments, but you can think of each customer as this experiment. And so if you have one cycle that goes in 3 months and is a 10x bigger deal than the cycle that takes 7 months and is a small deal, really being meticulous about what was different this time. How did that play out? Did we do something different? Did they do something different? Was there a different group involved, a different advocate, a different exposure? Oh, it turns out that actually if the CEO believes X, then we fit perfectly in that and we have no friction. Well, how do we find an industry vertical or a group of companies or CEOs who believe X? Can we, and usually as a startup, you can't push that. So I do like the experimentation. I agree with everything that was said. I just think if it's early enough, I've seen companies try and optimize basically the wrong process.
So think about your portfolios for a second. My experience is as a serial CFO taking 4 companies public. And I'm thinking, okay, you've got Cisco, you've got LinkedIn, you've got Facebook, you've got all of these with funnel. How do you know what your funnel is? In other words, we're dealing with productivity, and we have different metrics that we can assess. But we're at the, companies that are Series C or ready to go public or on the other side of it 2 years away. We got to figure out the magic formula because we're building sales forces. When do you know a sales force is working? I don't know how many times I've had to aid in the redevelopment of the sales force.
I only have a couple experiences, so I'll defer over. From my point of view, I actually I see a lot of similarity in some of the funnels that you build. In consumer, what we got very good at, starting with Web 1.0 and then Web 2.0, is thinking of different channels and every step of the way between how someone would touch this channel, did they touch other things, what steps they take along the way. And we borrowed that a lot from the sales world. Viral channels can be understood, paid channels can be understood, have different dynamics. I'll talk about organic later because that's been my pet project for the last 5 years, is how you build organic traffic and acquisition. But when it comes to sales, I always think the proof is I always think of enterprise sales as really about operational scalability and repeatability, right? So now fortunately Mike Gamson at LinkedIn did a phenomenal job, but to me that magic point when you can hire an incremental salesperson, train them in a certain number of months, and have reasonably good predictive power that they can hit a certain quota in a certain number of months. It's a little bit it's a little bit like I used to teach. Teaching again this fall at Stanford. It's a very different thing to have to teach something than be able to think you understand it yourself. And so to me, the sign with Salesforce is have you built a company and operation where you can teach new people how to do it? And if you can't, and it's not repeatable, then you might have been relying on, magic people who have their own skills, or they found a niche that was big but not big enough to really scale. But there's something wrong in the hypothesis. To me, the warning flag is always when you start having high failure rates of bringing on new salespeople.
Or if the actual to productivity curve is slow, it takes 6 months to get a sale done. You expect it to be in 6 months. I'm going to stay with this guy for let's give him another quarter, or another 2 quarters, or another 3 quarters, because it's a potentially big deal. I've seen that a lot.
Look, I mean, once again, I'll defer. My experiences has been that some failure rate is expected. I was totally okay at LinkedIn if we hired, I'm going to get myself in trouble because I'm dating myself, but in the fast hypergrowth, like 2008, 2009, if we had, 20 potential salespeople come in on contract within 3 months, we realized that half of them weren't going to work. That was actually okay with us. It was a really strange market. People didn't have experience. It wasn't like the CRM market or
Well done.
yeah.
In my experience, that CEOs and boards take too long.
Yeah, but I don't know if you had different experiences.
I'll just add one thing. Salesforce and a couple other of the enterprise companies have been at. The fastest way I've seen to shorten your sales cycle or increase the productivity of sales reps is to lose faster. And the example that you have, I looked at my first company. We did a lot of analytics for sales organizations. And on average, in tech companies, the time it takes, if it takes 90 days on average to win a deal, what do you think is the average time it takes for them to lose a deal?
6 months.
It's 205 was the average. So they win deals in 90 days, but they don't mark a deal as lost until 205. If you look at what happens to the likelihood of closing for deals that are 100 days old and deals that are 150 days old, the likelihood of them closing, right around 90 days, it's about 30%. For just a generic across all types, about 30% of the deals get won. When you get over 180 days, it's under 5%. Yet it's just the sunk cost. So you need to be, the fastest way to improve your productivity is, this deal is already at 130 days. Unless you can tell me something really specific about why you want to keep focusing on this, let it go, focus on a younger deal that you can nurture and probably close in 90 days. All right, sorry.
Can you maybe share a bit about the things in Wealthfront that helped you reach this very strong growth?
Yeah, so Wealthfront's a hard problem. And I remember when I met Andy Ratcliffe, one of the debates we had is I believed in the product, believed in the business, believed the company would be important and it needed to happen, but only if you could get to sufficient scale for it to be a venture class business. And that means sufficient scale fast enough. And I was doing growth talks at the time at Greylock, because coming out of LinkedIn, I had a whole breakdown of kind of organic traffic, paid traffic, SEO, all the different channels, mobile, that you'd want to hit to scale a business. And we actually spent quite a bit of time debating it and came up with half a dozen ways we might scale the business. So I guess the two things I would say is that one, I actually, at LinkedIn, we had the luxury of pursuing growth really absent economic concerns. Fundamentally, we knew at LinkedIn that if we got the network effect going, that having a platform that had a lot of proprietary knowledge about who professionals were and how they were connected, that there were a number of businesses we could build over that platform. And so the growth team didn't have to think about economics, and we didn't do any paid acquisition, et cetera. Wealthfront doesn't have natural network effects. So the question became, how do you keep the economics of this business sustainable? If you looked at what the traditional industry spent on acquisition, it's ridiculous. Charles Schwab spends $800, $1,000 because they think if they get you into their branch and you're 50-something and you have a 6 to 7 figure value, that they'll convert you over a few months into a customer, and that's worth a certain amount to them. And they'll also do brand spend, which of course is largely non-economic, and startups don't have that luxury. Wealthfront, the hard part is we wanted to be like Vanguard. So not only did we want to be a low-cost service, that literally meant that our value of a customer was going to be lower because we were charging them less, right? So it's almost like you start with one hand tied behind your back. So the only way to make that work, in my view, was to basically get to the heart of how do you drive a lot of organic traffic, which is why I said I spent a lot of time on this in the last 5 years, as well as amplifying sources of traffic that are effectively free. So to this day, Wealthfront gets about 3/4 or more of its traffic and users for free, either from organic sources or viral sources. And that's not true of any other player in the space. But we did that because that's actually how you made the business not just sustainable, but actually made it a great business. Now, I thought of it as an economic problem when I joined Wealthfront and kind of pursued metrics-driven, et cetera. But it actually turned out that the focus on organic traffic got me back to some of the design and product roots that were very common in the desktop era. We kind of forgot with the web, to be honest. And then mobile has brought back to the fore of getting to that fundamental problem of not, like when I did viral at LinkedIn, viral factor, et cetera, you knew every part of the flow, every engagement, you could increase the branching factor, you could increase the cycle time, all these different metric-based things that you could do to improve our viral engine. Forgetting all that for a second, it was like, what gets someone to love a product so much that they talk about it? Right? I actually found myself reaching a little bit more to my Apple experience about what it means to kind of surprise and delight customers. Like, what are those moments where someone touches a product and they didn't expect it, but when they see it, it's so obvious they just want to show someone. And so a lot of the time I spent with the companies that I've invested in on the consumer side, or certainly at Wealthfront, is we had a lot of conversations about the emotions that went with the experience. And there's a lot of emotions around money. I mean, a lot of people think money is very boring, and they might be right, but it turns out people have a lot of emotions about money, some good, some bad. You talk about all of them. Well, that's right. So that's actually a great kind of question. The question was like, how do you trigger them? So even at LinkedIn, towards the tail end when I was there, we had one feature that was on the platform team, apply with LinkedIn, right? And it was the first time we went really deep on the emotions of the job experience, not just the numbers, but the emotions. And it was very insightful. Like we basically decided that there were two big emotions at play. On the positive side, applying for a job had a lot of hope to it. There was if I get this job, my life's going to change. If I get this job, I'm going to be able to afford the new house. If I get this job, my mom's going to be proud of me. Like, I don't know, like this. But there's all these kind of hope emotions. And you didn't have to talk to 1,000 people to find this out. Like, you talk to a couple dozen job seekers and you'd get these emotions. It's basic user research. But there was negative emotions too. They were afraid. They were afraid that they're not going to understand this part of my resume. I don't have a good connection at this company. It's going to go to someone who's a friend of, it's going to go to someone else who has an inside connection. I don't look good here. I just don't, I wouldn't hire me. There are all these fears. They're not really going to read this, et cetera. And so we tried to make, the challenge we put to the design team was, when you click this button, how can we amplify those positives? Right, and dial down the negatives. And I actually think the design team, after a number of iterations, got to a place where you click this button and all of a sudden it had it wasn't like a resume, it was had a photo, it had your best experiences. You were like, I would hire me. I never looked this good. This is fantastic. And to dial down the fears, immediately we were like, you're connected. Here's all the people you know at this company. So we literally went direct from that user research, those insights, into kind of the emotions. And then you have these great product brainstorms of how do you attack those. Now, I don't think that gets to distribution and growth, and we weren't trying to do that. Apply with LinkedIn, we were already big enough that we were pretty sure that if there was a way to apply with a LinkedIn profile, that we could just get that out there. But as a startup, you don't have that luxury. So the best discussions I see at startups are really about what's the magic moment? How often do new users even hit that magic moment? How do you make it happen faster? And is it really magic? Will people want to talk about it or share it when they see it? And part of that element is a little bit of that surprise. Like I said, there's a little bit of that innovation there of they wouldn't have thought of it themselves, but once they see it, they're like, this is amazing. And so we would regularly at Wealthfront, last couple of years in a product review, et cetera, someone has an idea for a new feature. The question of what what's the magic moment? Like what's going to delight the user about this? What are they going to love about this? And if you don't have it, it's I actually think it's very hard to generate organic traffic reliably if you don't have that. I mean, you're thinking about Facebook and photos. For anyone who's around at that time and paying attention, like, people had real delight about it. They had real delight about pushing it out. They had real delight about keeping up and seeing what other people were posting. Like, there was a reason why photos were huge for social networks. Huh?
So what is it about? What's that?
Oh, actually, I'm a little guilty about this because I think that for a whole bunch of reasons I won't get into, I don't think we've done as good a job here. There's a magic moment at Wealthfront. There's a couple. One is the first time Wealthfront saves you money on taxes, a lot of people are like, that's amazing.
I was going to share a different one.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, as a user. It's when you wake up and you didn't do anything. You were sleeping, you wake up, and it made you money. That was pretty cool.
Yes.
But
I'm going to put an asterisk on that one.
Okay.
Yes. It's just
all right,
hard to make the markets do stuff. But yes, you're right.
But I mean, it's the automated trading.
The automated
right?
thing. So I was going to say
so it's like
the
I didn't
second
do anything. It just did it for me.
The second delight moment, which we tried to push through the feed and the mobile app, et cetera, was all that automation of doing stuff for you. So everything from whether it was the rebalancing, dividend reinvestment, the tax loss harvesting. But I actually thought there was a magic moment when people felt like they became an investor. We saw it a lot in the user research. Like, when they made this decision that they were going to do something usually responsible with their money and open up a Wealthfront account, the minute they saw that they had investments, there was something to it. And I was always frustrated that it took too long. Like, in a perfect world, you would have clicked that button and, like, you would have been an investor. But these are kind of discussions we had. Like, so 529's college savings plan. One of the reasons that you can add a photo of your child is, like, there's a real emotional attachment. Like, it's a very abstract thing, but, like, when you open up the 529 to see how it does, like the performance, actually seeing the face of your kid there is, it ties you more back to why you're doing it in the first place, right? And so, the guy who did all the iPod and kind of iTunes ad campaigns gave a great talk once, where he talked a bit about how Apple's advertising strategy with the iPod and iTunes was, you had 30 seconds in a TV spot. You can do 27 seconds of heart, but you have at least 3 seconds of brain, that there's this balance where the brain has to feel like you gave them enough concrete reason to do it, but there's enough emotion to make them to want to do it. I don't know what the right balance is for your product or for different products. For Wealthfront, I always wanted to push a little bit of, maybe I'd flip that around. It was like 80% rational, but I was always pushing to money being emotional and how do you get that right balance so that people feel good about what they're doing. So, yeah. You first.
This is a question specifically about the enterprise space. You kind of alluded to this in the beginning. One of the advantages of the consumer space is you have very immediate feedback and scale. But a startup in the enterprise space, in the real world, has a very, very finite number of data points. In a long sales cycle and maybe a handful, a couple of dozen, or several dozen clients, it's extremely hard to put the funnel and know in a reasonable period of time what's working, what isn't, what's working, what isn't. So my question is specifically around how do you operate, how do you deliver growth in an environment where you don't have that perfect data, you don't have that immediate feedback. And specifically, I'd like to kind of put the focus on farm versus house. So, you've got great business on it. You double down on growing those accounts and making them bigger. You try to get the clients to maybe it's both. But where do you put the resources and how do you make that decision when you just don't have the data?
I have a strong opinion about this, more from the venture side.
Go ahead. I want to hear your strong opinion.
Okay.
I already know my opinions. I want to learn yours.
So I mean, and this will sound a little bit more venture biased, but I think in the early stages, like when we were starting the enterprise business at LinkedIn, we had already raised a Series C, like we already had a consumer product, 10 million users. We had some consumer revenue lines working. I don't think that's the same as a startup that's starting from scratch. Like I think the startup model is phased for a really good reason. And that's what I meant about not over-optimizing early. I mean, usually in the beginning, when you have a new enterprise product, I mean, your basic hypothesis is that like anyone need this. Does it actually add real value? And if you have some humility about it, you're like, I really don't know. And the reason so many talented enterprise, I think venture capitalists, focus on those first lighthouse customers, right? Is like that's a big risk right there. Like, does this product add enough value? Is this pain point big enough that people would actually pay for it, right? And so forget scaling it or optimizing growth channel or anything like that. Like the importance in those very early days, like seed stage, of actually proving that this product, will work for a reasonable sized enterprise that has this problem, that your hypothesis is close to true. Very important. To me, the question of operational scalability is one for later rounds, right? It's okay, I've been doing all the sales usually as a founder, that sort of thing. Like, are we at the point where we know enough, where we have a hypothesis, what vertical to go after or how this works? You hire that first salesperson, maybe that second. That's another hypothesis. Usually by Series C, you're figuring out like, okay, do we really have this nailed that we can add, 20, open new regions, hire more people? But I usually encourage people to think of that phase and be really honest about what phase they're in. I've seen folks I'm with where they're on their first couple of customers. They ask the question you do: should I try and make these 2 customers bigger and more successful, or get a third or a fourth?
Yeah.
But I'm really focusing on managing a company that has, let's say, 40.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a framework that I use, which I think works pretty well. First and foremost, and this also works in consumer as well. The words are a little bit different, but in consumer, you want to focus on retention before you focus on acquisition, and in enterprise, you need to focus for startup companies, very small, a few dozen customers. You need to focus on engagement before you focus on acquisition. So, what the first thing is, you need to measure what are the key actions that you want people to take in the product, and are they taking those? If they're not, that is your one and only focus. So that's the thing you focus on first. You want that the customers you do have are highly engaged, and therefore they're going to continue using it, and that is your signal for product market fit. Don't worry about anything else until you've got that. Once you've got that, then there are 2 dimensions you can leverage to grow. One is you can focus on, for the people who are in your funnel right now, you've got a set of people that you've identified that the product works for. These are the ones that are getting good engagement now. It's bringing them into the product in such a way that they are exposed and aware of the things that add value to it. So it's this process. Stage 2 is this process of feature awareness. Everybody's always focused on adding more and more and more features. The best thing you can do, usually in the early stages of the product, is optimize the features you already have, because that's the core of your product. If people aren't using the core, adding all these additional features for power users isn't really going to help. So the second thing is optimize your existing features, figure out which are the ones that people are getting the most value out of. You can do that with data. Like what I would typically do is you just correlate people who use these features, do they tend to use the product more overall? If so, what we want to try is, can we morph the product such that that feature becomes more prominent, or those features become more prominent? Once you've done that, then you move on to stage 3, which is expand the base for which that product is going to be a highly engaging product. That's when you focus on adding new features, extensions to whatever you've got. That's the framework I have. So it's engagement, then it's feature awareness for what you already have, and then it's extending with new features.
Is there a small follow-up? Is there a rule of thumb that you guys use for, depending on the stage, what percentage of growth you expect to come from
Actually, what do you mean? But yeah, because
I mean, growing existing accounts versus acquiring.
yeah, early days, it's going to be mostly getting new accounts. But for at least my experience, but as you mature, this is particularly true for consumer as well. You're going to get more value from focusing on your existing users. Like at Google, we get a lot more growth by getting our existing users to do more searches per month than by getting new users. We can maybe get 100 million new users for search a year, but the average user around the world does about 14 searches per month, and we probably all did 14 searches before lunch.
You have like billions of users.
We do, right.
Yeah.
So
Like
for
running out of
us,
humans.
it's about increasing depth of engagement from existing users. So I think that comes second.
That's what I was going to say, is that if you're lucky, I shouldn't say lucky, if you're successful, that's what happens, right? Like, I mean, I remember one point when I was at eBay, we actually hit something like 90% of the adults in Germany had eBay accounts and been active. And it was like, literally like, unless we're going to make a lot more Germans, like, you can only build depth of engagement, like you can't do it. But almost at every phase of the startup game, it's about actually acquisition. It's about new customers. And the reason I say that is because usually startups don't actually, there are a few exceptions, but usually startups don't create the wave. There's some massive latent demand that's hit a point, and everyone's going to have a solution like that within a certain number of years, especially on the enterprise side. And in that scenario, there's a lot of time to grow the accounts later and go deeper. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you're making accounts unhappy and you have this, you don't want to replicate a bad thing, but almost always the bias ends up towards, I mean, like, look, a lot of enterprise software companies are talking about the global 2000, right? Like, there's 2,000 of them, like, and they're not all even. And so there is a bit of a forcing function in time to kind of get more and more customers, assuming that the market is really happening. And I say that with a little hesitation because companies have fumbled badly by acquiring a lot of customers, developing a terrible reputation. But usually I think what you're calling farming.
And not having the right product.
Not having the right product.
So
yeah.
I do want to caution that, though, yes, you have to, in the early days, you're going to grow by getting more customers. Don't even bother trying to grow until you've got the right product, right? So if you're going to try and get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new customers with a product that doesn't have the right engagement yet, you're going to just churn through them really quickly. Yeah. So don't even bother asking that question until you've got engagement first.
Right.
In the enterprise side, it's harder.
But actually, is there? I think we only have time for one more question. Could we ask? Yes, in the back. Yes.
You talked earlier about the time it takes to use a deal versus market deal as one, and then discount cost and all that other process. Can you talk a little bit? So one thing you can do is like spend more time qualifying up front, then get less leads versus getting more leads and then spend more time qualifying them, then see more lost deals. Can you talk a little bit about like how to balance between getting more leads and qualifying them versus filtering more upfront, but potentially like losing potential qualified leads because there's kind of a barrier with first organization?
I think it's hard to know too much in terms of how well you can qualify a lead up front until you start talking to them more and more. The thing that I usually do to like qualify leads up front is more, did we get them from a high quality channel or high quality source? If we got them at a trade show, it generally is not very high quality. If they attended a seminar, that's very high quality. So those are the things that up front I use to help filter. But really, I think the best way is as you move through the funnel, the key is not what stage they're in. The key is how quickly they've gotten there. So you can qualify and figure out who you should be cutting and who not to by the velocity. So when you think about your sales funnel overall, it's really a mistake to say, I've got $3 million of deals in stage 6, which is my final stage. It's a real problem if 2.5 million of those have been there for 150 days. Those are dead deals, you just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. So what you really want to look at is the way you qualify deals in and out is how fast they're moving.
And I would, oh, sorry. That's a little different. That's it's a good. I was going to add on anyway, so I think it's a good point. Is that a lot of what we just went through on the enterprise side? It's actually true in e-commerce. I'd say in fintech as well. The hardest thing I think for consumer companies to do, and I think we did poorly at this in some of the Web 2.0 companies, just because we were trying to get to everyone. Like, who's eBay for? Everyone. Who should use Google? Everyone. Who should use Facebook? Everyone. You quickly got there. And we forget that actually if you design for everyone, you kind of design for no one. So actually on the consumer side, and talk about leads, knowing who you're designing for, knowing who you really optimized your value for. It's very hard to admit in the early days that you're not for everyone, or that you're not perfect. And hungry salespeople or people who want to promote you will always go after the next, the next open field and that sort of thing. And so Wealthfront, we were very clear, actually, that we started with young people in tech, and then we discovered that actually our sweet spot was really 30-something households. Like there was this magic point in your early 30s where, if you were getting serious, getting married, that sort of thing, you start taking money seriously, you were a very high-value customer for us, and you liked Wealthfront a lot. But that turns into kind of failing fast, which I think what you said was knowing who not to pursue, but it requires a certain amount of confidence. The thing that you described about in terms of the questionnaire or long flows, there are consumer purchases that are considered purchases. And it's a really funny thing because we really learned a lot in the early web about just how do I lower friction? Fewer screens, less steps. There's this counterintuitive thing that actually happens for considered purchases where the more you put people through, you do see drop off, but the ones who convert, it's phenomenal. The value of that customer is just incredibly high because there's a little bit of confirmation bias. I mean, anyone who's actually shopped for, nutritional aids or fitness things or an expensive kind of exercise regime, you kind of see this, they make you watch a long video, you kind of this long flow. It's because they're kind of building up your commitment so that if you do convert, you really are going to spend money on it. And so Wealthfront was a little bit like that. Our minimum when we launched was $5,000. I mean, at eBay, we thought every purchase over $250 was a very difficult purchase. Who would spend $250 online, right? Without seeing the thing like this 10 years ago. But so what we optimized at Wealthfront for was trust. We actually put extra things in the flow to send a strong signal that we were taking this seriously. We had done our research. This was academically grounded, trustworthy way to manage your money. And that's because we were fighting the natural opposition to Wealthfront was, who would be crazy enough to let a computer manage your money? But that's why we designed the flow the way we did. And actually, we did experimentation. Shortening the flow really didn't improve numbers for us. Changing the order of certain questions definitely improved things for us in terms of it was signaling to our customer what we cared about, what we put up front, what we put second, that sort of thing. We can talk more afterward if you're curious.
Well, they told us we had 1 minute left, but then the person who told us that left, so I don't know. We can go with another question until they give us the hook.
Organic or viral? SEO wasn't relevant for us. I meant organic. I meant they came largely to Wealthfront. The real thing that we got going with Wealthfront that helped our economics, viral is fantastic, right? Well, we discovered that most of our organic traffic, a little bit was PR driven, but that's a very long-term brand thing. Most of our organic traffic was frankly just word of mouth offline, right? It turns out people do talk about money, not with most people, but with some people. And we had really optimized Wealthfront to be that, so if you were a customer of Wealthfront, and I said, hey, have you ever heard of Wealthfront? You'd say, oh yeah, I've been using them for a few months. And then the idea was well, what do you think of it? And ideally, you would say something along the lines of oh, I love it. And usually you'd talk about how it was different than your bank or your brokerage or things you'd used in the past.
How do you start this? From day one, there are no people to talk about the product because nobody uses your product. How do you get the actual users that you start talking about it?
Zero start problem is a big issue. A lot of the early customers at Wealthfront were either people who were friends of the firm, heard of it, that sort of thing. But we did very well with early engineers at Facebook and Google. And that's because the brainstorming was, who in their right mind would trust a startup to manage their money with a computer? And the answer was, if you go to startup people, they don't have as much of a bias against startups. And if you go to engineers, they always think software does it better than people. And it turns out...
There was a point when I was at Facebook where pretty much everybody I was working with was either investing with Wealthfront or investing in Wealthfront.
Yeah.
It's one of those two.
And we did that on purpose. I even wrote a post about it. But even our investors, a lot of those early customers, but there was a lot of direct hand-to-hand combat there. There was a lot of just talking to people, answering questions, learning, good old-fashioned, because it wasn't like LinkedIn or Facebook where you had millions of customers, or a viral loop where you tipped Harvard and then Stanford and all these different schools. We were using those first customers almost like lighthouse customers to figure out what the product should be and what mattered. So I would say the two most important things there were, one is that we delighted those customers, like we had good referrals for it. But I'm a big believer, you tell your customers what to think, right? I have an engineering background, but marketing matters, content matters. What you write about, how you present information, not just what you do, but how you do it. You're telling your customer what you believe. Then when they use your product, they decide whether you're a liar or not. I hate to be blunt, but it's like, so you can't say things that are not true, but if you tell a customer, we're doing this for this reason, we think it's important, and you do that well, they try you out, and if you've done a good job, I believe that's how you get that engine going. And in the beginning, you'll get a bunch of misses. Like, we had a lot of early customers who had money, who were in their 50s and 60s and thought Wealthfront was the next hot company. And what we quickly discovered is they weren't happy with Wealthfront, because they were like, yeah, but if I want to talk to someone, who do I talk to? We looked for customers who literally didn't want to talk to someone. Once again, it turned out young people in tech, fantastic. I felt for a while people would actually pay us not to talk to them, right? And so I think that there is finding out who that sweet spot is, that customer, testing your hypothesis is important. But Wealthfront, in the entire first 12 months of launching the site, got maybe 1,000 customers. There was some switch over from Kaching, but it was about 1,000 clients. But we learned a lot that year about what the product wanted to be, who loved it, and we had a hypothesis on how to do more of it. And so then the growth really took off because we started doubling down on what that core product wanted to be. Anyway, we're out of time. Thank you, everyone. I will stay after for questions. But